Scrap Happy number 8. Oh my goodness, I had no idea it'd go this long. I just keep getting more and more scrap ideas and stash fabric quilt plans, and I can't stop, but we're going to have to eventually. But not before this quilt is finished. This is absolutely wonderful and such fun. This is just about the most interesting log cabin block I think I have ever seen, never mind made. So it's been a lot of fun, and I'm anxious to share it with you. I'm Leah Louise from Inspired Quilting by Leah Louise, and this block is incredible. Look at that behind me. Those are only 6 blocks. And I have a lot more to finish the quilt, plus there's one more step, but I'm not going to give that away till the next video because it is going to make this quilt stand out in a spectacular way. But in the meantime, we need to learn how to make these blocks. And it's not hard, but it's a bit fussy at points. You look at those blocks and there's a lot of pieces and strips, but there are some very easy methods we can use to make it go more quickly and easily without a lot of, what do I want to say, too much math involved. This is just about fun with fabric and quilting beautiful log cabin blocks. So I'm anxious to get started, and I want to show you how this works. So please give me a thumbs up if you enjoy the video, and don't forget to subscribe. If you haven't noticed, I'm almost to 10,000 subscribers, and you could be the one who put me over the top, and I would appreciate that so much. But now we have to get on to quilting. Wait until I show you how to make this block. Here's a beautiful block with some fun colors, and I like the bright yellow in the center, and then pulling out the gold and that lavender, and blue makes a nice accent. And then we've got some of these really dark kind of burgundy colors, and I thought that would make a really nice outer strip, and it works really well together. I think this is such a pretty block. Now watch how we make it. Now the center of this block does not have to be square. You can use a rectangle. Each of these you can see are pieced together in the middle, and rather than cut them into squares and lose the fabric, I decided to leave it as a rectangle. And I want to show you how to maneuver with this. The idea after your middle square is inserted with your within your first row, this piece is going to measure 7¼ inches. So from one side to the other, I'll use my 8-inch ruler. This is just shy, but we're 7¼ inches there, and 7¼ inches there. Now, what I did is I used a 2½ inch strip on each side, and I put it on the long side because I knew this is where I was going to need most of my width. So with that, I got my 7¼ inches. Then I also used a 2½ inch down each side because I didn't have enough to just get away with a 2-inch. I wouldn't have enough for the seam allowance. So I used a 2¼ and then I trimmed it evenly. You don't have to do it evenly on each side. You can leave one thicker or wider than the other and sort of have that be your base. Now I did that with this one. So this one was a larger center square, and I did these sides first. Because this was longer, I added my strips to the short width to take advantage of that width. And in order to get my 7¼ inches, I used just enough. So let's see. So this block measured 4¼ and I needed to add 2 inches. Now, with seam allowance, obviously, I have to go with at least a 2½, because when I start this project, I have a 1½ inch background, a 2-inch background, and a 2½. I don't want to be going with quarters. I'd rather trim. That also gives me extra edges that I can use for trimming so I don't cut myself short. So in this case, these measure. This one measures 1 3/4. and this one measures also 1 3/4. So by using the 2-inch strip, I used exactly what I needed to get my 7 1/4 right there. And then on the other side, this is wider, and I still needed to use my, let's see, this one I used a 2-inch strip because I have just that 1/4 inch left. I was able to do that and use a 2 1/2 on one side and a 2 on the other. So when I'm making this block, I'll keep this as the bottom. Not that it matters in the block, they can be turned any which way, but just for the sake of me putting this together, that helps me think it through. So here's what I'm working on now. I want this one to be 7 1/4. I put it on my mat, and let's turn it right side up. So we've got, let's see, there's 7 and there's my 1/4. But it only measures not even 3 1/2 inches. So I know I'm going to need to get to 7 1/2 about, what is that, 4 1/2 inches or so, give or take, when you consider the seam allowance. So the first thing I'm going to do is add the wide 2 1/2 inch strip on what I'm going to call the bottom. So then, once that's on, I'll measure and see what comes next. So give me just a moment and we'll get that taken care of. And I sewed the 2 1/2 inch strip on, and it currently measures 5 1/4. But I'm going to show you the easy way to figure out how much more fabric you need. Set your ruler at 7 1/4. And you know you're going to need 2 more inches to make this the full width. Plus, we have a 1/4 inch seam and a 1/4 inch seam, so that's 2 1/2 inches. So I can't get away with using a smaller strip, but that's one of the methods I used to figure it out, because there were times that I was making some of these blocks and it was getting really complicated because I'd put this in the middle, I'd measure out, and I'd divide it by 2, and it's like, oh my goodness, that gives me a headache. So this is the quick trick. Put it where you want it, whatever your number may be. Maybe you're going to make your strip or your center block 8 inches. You know, these are just numbers that I chose that work for me, and they're completely adjustable. They're variable, whatever you want to do. And, you know, there you have it. You see exactly what you need. Just remember to add that 1/2 inch seam allowance to whatever this amount is. All right, let me go ahead and finish this block up, and I'll show you what it looks like. Okay, I've added the block. I'm going to finger press, and we should be right where we need to be. Look at that, right at 7 1/4 inches. That's great. Come back here, 7 1/4 inches. So now all I need to do is trim my block down, and I work from this part because, again, I always go from these center strips that I've added because I know that's the straight. Because I cut these with scissors at the machine, I cut them long so that I know I have enough room to work with and to trim. So I go ahead and I set my ruler along the edge so I can get my 7 1/4. I line this up right on the inch line, and I come over here and I'm going to do my 7 1/4 again, and see, it lines up nice with that interior seam, and there, I'm good to go. So we have 3 blocks, and each one, you can see they measure a little different around the edges, but that's okay. The key is that this block measures 7 1/4, and it's just going to make things a lot easier. So let's go ahead and we're going to start adding some strips. And with my center block set to go, I have my interior square, or actually in this case rectangle, and then I put the first background round on, and so now I'm set to add my next 3 rows with color. And I have a series of colors here that I'm going to work on. I work from the inside to the outside. I start with narrow, go to a medium width, and then a narrow is how I'm going to do this. And I start with about a 7 1/4 inch square. So we squared these up, And now we're going to add our rows. But we also need a bit of background to match. So these are 1.5 inch, which is going to go around first. And then I have a 1.5 inch, oh, you can't see that, I'm sorry. These are 1.5 inch pieces that will get sewn to the background strip and then sewn to the block, which is exactly what these are. So let me go ahead and get started. I want to show you how this works. So I need this one, and I need, that's going to go on the outside, and I'm going to go with this one. So what I do is I sew a strip to each end of my background strip. So I think, I don't know if there's one or two here. Okay, we've got one. And I'm going to sew this on and just use my 1/4 inch seam. Then I'm going to take the other end and add this one on. It just makes it a bit quicker when I go to add these onto the block if I have the two for the same row, put it that way. This goes in stages, and it's easy to mess up, quite honestly, and get twisted and turned around. So what I found that works for me is when we do the converging square log cabin, it is very similar to the courthouse steps in the way it's laid out. We have a center block, and then we do the sides, and we do in the top, the bottom. Now we're going to do the side first, and let's see, I'm going to go this way. Actually, I prefer going this way because then the seam goes in my favor. Now the first row, I don't want to have more than halfway into my block, and that's just so it allows me enough room for the other blocks that are coming in here, and or the other strips, I should say, so we get enough variation in how they fall, and I'll show you that as we go. So we start up here, we work our way through, and at this point I'm just going to finger press everything while I'm showing you this. Okay, now I would recommend that as you're doing this, you can do all 4 sides and then do your measure. I would trim at every row, only because, let's see, we're going to go this way, only because it can get off easily, and if you're off too far, that makes it quite difficult to catch up later without adding more rows, and with the amount of what do I want to say, precision to get this to equal the right block. When you have multiple strips and you want to equal a certain size, there's a bit of pre-planning, and that's the part that I found in the beginning that kind of threw me off on these, because I saw a picture. I could not find a pattern for this anywhere. So folks, we are winging this, but that's okay. We can figure it out. And I mean, a log cabin's a log cabin. It's just some variations that make it more interesting. And you know, when we work at it to come up with a pattern that we haven't seen before, that gives us an opportunity to get creative and learn a little bit more and apply some of our skills that we haven't used before in order to, you know, expand our quilting. So I'm going to go ahead, oh, that one's wider. I'm just going to put this in the middle. Let's see. So if I'm going to sew this way, this is going to be the seam that goes up close. So I'm going to put this up close here and let that excess hang off. And then when I trim the block, that'll be the edge that gets trimmed. Oops, let me get my other side here. I'm going to double the blue. You know, I've gone from making some of these blocks really sort of sedate and not terribly loud and rambunctious. And you know, I'm doing some of these with some batiks. I did a few with the K facet. So I've just kind of picked all kinds of fabric to use for this, and I'm having a lot of fun putting it together. So let's see, we've got this is going to go here, and so we want to have these unequal. We don't want them to be exactly the same, because we're not doing a traditional log cabin where everything falls equally. This is definitely more of a modern version, an updated version of a traditional pattern, which makes it a lot of fun. And that's why I'm using some really wild and crazy fabrics, just because, you know, it'll make it that much more fun to look at. So let's go ahead and, whoops, I started too far. And the other thing that I've done, and you've seen me do this on a multiple of the log cabins we've done recently, is I will sew my strips together. Now, on a lot of them that I've done, I do sew them on the bias. For this, though, I've been sewing them end to end, only because they're small pieces, and that bias, I think, will just create too much of a distraction, maybe? I'm not sure what the word is. Let me get this piece. I didn't cut that off. So, for whatever reason, just because I thought it was the right thing to do for me, I went ahead and did it that way. And I think I'm going to like it a lot. So, we'll do this one. And don't make them exactly the same. So this one's probably, what, about 2 inches? I'm going to make this one go a little longer. And because these are all going to join up together, and the corners that we're creating with all this pattern and color, they're going to create sort of a cross pattern in the middle where they meet, which is really fun. So all these different blocks and fabrics just come right together and kind of bounce off each other and look awesome. Okay, so I have my first round completed. Let me just trim all this off, and I just trim those like that. And let's see, I'm going to do that with my ruler. So there's round one. That was quick and easy. So I'm going to go ahead and do a quick trim on this, and I'll come back and we'll get the next row done. Well, it's all trimmed. We're going to add another row, and I'm going to use the 2-inch wide piece, and we always start on the sides, just like any other log cabin. We always start at the beginning for each row, and in this case we put on the 2 sides. And instead of a 1.5-inch piece of background, I have a 2. So for this project, I have pre-cut 1.5-inch strips, 2-inch strips, and then 2.5-inch strips. And that works out really well. So I am going to do my 2-inch strips and add them on. So the first one, just making sure that's not a selvage. It looked like it, but it's not. And I'm going to put the first one here, and we'll get that 1/4-inch seam. And I'll take this one, and we'll go here. Oh, y'all remember these dots? Oh, I had so much fun. This is one of the first scrap quilts that we did, and I love how it turned out. It's so pretty. Actually, I'll put a link here, so if you missed that one, it's worth a second look. It's pretty awesome. All right, so let's see. The purple is going to go over there, and let's see, it's going to go this way. Get myself turned around. And if you noticed, I sew to each end. I think I mentioned that. It just makes it easier, and it keeps me on track. So I sew 2 at a time, making sure I don't skip a row anywhere. So I'm going to come down, you know, about 1.5 inches. Now, some you can do closer, some you can do farther. Actually, I may take this down a couple inches because the next row is going to be only 1.5 inches wide. So it'd look kind of cool to have this particularly long and that one narrow. Because I don't want everything to look exactly the same. This is the kind of quilt where all those differences just make it much more interesting. So we'll come down here, and I'll use this second half for the next round. So I'm just going to cut that off and leave it to the side. And now I'll do the same thing here. I'll cut this off so I can sew the other end over here. And let's see, it's going to go this way. And since I took that one real long, I don't want to go quite as long. I'll go, see how this one's going just past that block? I'll take this one to just inside that block, just to keep some asymmetrical appeal there, so not everything is exactly the same. And just go through. Like this. And we cut it off. And I have another piece of this blue because I knew what I had wasn't going to be enough. All right, so now, again, I'm going to sew my pieces to my background, and we'll go. You know, there's always a question, is there a right side or wrong side to batiks? And you know, I use batiks so much and for so long, I kind of have my own way of figuring out. If you have a bolt or a cut of fabric and the selvage is on there with the name and the markings, whatever side has the name and the markings is the right side. So if you always leave a bit of that selvage, you can tell. But the other thing, if you look up close, you see how solidly filled these are? Where on this side, it's sort of washed out and has some spots where maybe the dye didn't completely fill in. So if you look at that compared to this, yeah, so just put these two dots together. So I like the darker side, but there are times you may want the lighter side. But just sort of understanding there's a difference, not always. Now in this particular case, because that's a solid object that's filled, you're going to have a better chance of being able to tell the difference. When it's a busy pattern with lots of different colors, yeah, you just pick whatever you like and it's really not going to be much of a difference. Okay, this, and then I need the other blue. And we'll get that sewn here. Just make them nice and straight. Okay, trim this. So let's go ahead and add our dots. And let's see. Oh, right there. Okay, don't do this and forget to fold that over. I've done it. That's why I know. I want to make sure that you've got everything turned over correctly. And if it's easier for you to go ahead and do a quick press between your row, your 1 and 2 piece and your 3 and 4, absolutely. I finger press and I'm usually pretty good about catching it. Okay, so let's go ahead and sew, whoops, get a little more there. Take this through. There's something going on. Oh, there we go. Just that other seam. Okay. I thought something was caught underneath. I couldn't figure out what it was. It was just another seam folded over. Luckily going in the right direction. So we'll take care of this. And we'll get the other one and do this. Let's see. And the other thing too is mix it up. Some of them change so they don't have the same, but others, like if you want a dominant color, which I wanted to go this blue, whereas this purple is sort of an accent here, and this blue sort of follows along with that. So there's sort of a method to my madness. I can't do complete scrappy random, pull it out of a bag and go. Just can't do that. I need to have a little bit more control, only because I'm not always happy with the way colors turn out. You know, I like to have colors balanced and have colors that work well together side by side and not just random. So that's just me. And whatever works for you is awesome. And that's what you want to go with. You're going to find what you're comfortable with, what works best. And that's exactly what you want to do. So let me go ahead. I'm going to get all these pieces trimmed off. Now I'm going to go and do my square measured up, but we'll do a quick finger press so you can get a look at how this is coming along. Those colors look pretty. I'm liking it. All right, we're on round 3 of our colored strips, and I put what do I want to say, strip 1 and 2 for this round on, and now I'm going to do the last couple. I thought we'd save ourselves just a little bit of time, and I'm going to take this one kind of long. I'm going to take it as far as I can here, and then we'll trim it up. And I think what I'll do is show you real quick how I trim this. Sometimes it can be hard to trim a larger square with all these different seams, and that's why it's important to trim it as you go to make sure that everything is right in place. Now see, this was folded, so there's a bit of an offset there. So I just have to account for that while I'm sewing it. And so we have this one, which looks nice. And then we'll go with this one. And let's see. We'll take this to about this far. There we go. So once I'm finished with this, I will trim my threads, and we will get this trimmed into the right size, because all the finished blocks need to measure 13.5 inches. And make sure we're there. Now, again, when we're sewing narrow strips, watch both sides so that you make sure you're going to get a good even strip. All right. Oh, ran out of bobbin. All right, let me fill my bobbin and get this finished, and then I'll show you how we trim this this block out. And check out this beautiful block. I love how this all comes together. We have some pretty lavender in here, which comes out in these fabrics, and then we have a little bit of lavender kind of splashed in here as well. But what I really like is just how the blue carries across. We've got blues and we've got blues and blues, and it just all works really well together. And then we've got the green highlights. That's what's important to me, is having colors, not that they blend, but that they are apparent, or they are, what do I want to say, they're accenting each other, you know, with the pops of green in here and over here. It just brings it all into a more cohesive color layout, and I really enjoy that part of it. Now, I love the look of this block, but you see this wonky strip right here? Something happened. I'm not exactly sure what, but with the miracle of a straight ruler and rotary cutter, this block came out square despite this funny business of getting wide and narrow. I obviously missed something there. I don't know. Maybe I was staring out the window instead of at the sewing machine. But I love how the block turned out. This is really pretty. Now that you've seen the blocks, I want to show you how they go together, the basic construction. The Converging Squares log cabin block is sewn together just like the courthouse steps. You start with a block in the middle, you do the sides, the top, and the bottom. Round 2, same thing, and we do a total of 3 rounds. What's different is the way the color is used and splitting these strips into different colors so that we have background that works throughout the block, and then we have these bright fabrics that are going to be in the corners. And this is what is going to create the design of the quilt. What's, the converging squares is these corners come together and make this wonderful pattern. So the first thing you do is you start with a block. Now this one I actually pieced. I've used scraps. I mean, this is a scrappy quilt. I'm using pieces left over from everything, which is perfect. That's exactly what this quilt would be ideal for. You can also there's so much. When you see the blocks, you're going to realize just how much there is available, or how many different options there are. So we start with a center block, and then we put our strip around in order to create this center square. Now each round needs to measure a certain distance or a certain square size, and that's variable. These numbers that I'm giving you are numbers that I used for my blocks. I did not find a pattern anywhere. I saw some general tutorials. I saw some close-ups of blocks, and so this is what I've determined works for me, and we get the same result, so I must be pretty close. But you can make adjustments. For example, most of the blocks appeared to be 12 inches. I'm making mine to be 13 inches because I wanted that extra strip, and I'll show you on some of the first blocks I did. These are quite narrow, which is appealing. I mean, it's attractive, it's fussy, and you're putting in more rows, and so I wanted to try some different layouts. So essentially what we have is our center square. Round 1 is the background, and we can change these according to the size that we need in order to meet the square that we want. Then we start with our next round, and what I do is I use my background strips. So I cut them in 3 sizes. While some may need trimming, I would rather just deal with 3 sizes of 1.5, 2, and 2.5, then fit in some quarter, like 1.5, 3/4, 2, 2.25, 2.5. That's just more than I can deal with. Three different sizes is fine. And if it comes out too big, I can trim it off. That works out great. So the first thing I do is I want to put the narrow strip in. And I sew the narrow strip onto a narrow background, and I'll do 2 at a time, and I sew it to the end of one strip. And the reason I do that is so I'll do two together. I find if I just do one, I may forget it, and then I start on the next round. This helps me remember that I need to put 2 down, and if I still have 1, that means I'm not finished with the round yet. So the first thing we do is our first row is going to go along the shortest row, just like we do in any log cabin. We start where the short row is and we work around. In this case, we work side to side and then top and bottom. So I have these 2 in place. Now I am going to, let's see, here it is. We're going to take our strip that has sewn a background and a focal fabric and going to put them here. Now, on the first block, I tried measuring these, and I thought, oh, this should be 1 inch bigger, and don't fuss with that. This is the easiest way to do it, because you can come into your square and say, oh, I want it here, I want it there, and if I put that there, then let's see, I think what I'll do is put this one over here and make this one longer and this one shorter. So you can play with it a little bit, so each block will become unique, and they won't all be cookie cutter shapes or cookie cutter layout or sizes. Now, some of the rows I'll use the same fabric. Other of them I will mix it up. Now in this case I had 2 batiks, same pattern, different colors, and I thought, oh, that's so pretty. And the greens tie in, and I'm bringing some blue because my accent fabrics is going to have some blue in there as well. So this is what we would do. Then this is our step here. Then once that's finished, I'm just going to set this aside. We go to our 2-inch strip, because the next row I'm going to add would be the 2-inch blocks or strips. And I'm going to just sew them, you know, straight end to end. And my goal is to have this one over here. Now it's going to come from here to here and from here to here. And then I will lay a 2-inch strip somewhere about here. So I'm going to sew this in. I'll come over here. I'll do the same thing. So I'll tuck these little, oh, that's too hard. That'll get in the way and make a mess of things. So this one also, I feel we've got a K facet in the middle. We'll get a little bit on the outside as well. And then bring this in maybe like this. And of course, we're missing the other half of this, but I'm going to show you the actual sewing when we get to that point. And this, notice how each strip gets longer. And that's part of the design as well. And so these corners are built up as you go. And this one, I don't have a lot of this. I'm probably going to have to find another piece. But oh, that works real pretty right there. So this is how it's all going to work. Let me just kind of tuck these in so we can see them a little better. Oh, I don't know. It might work after all. And this is how the block is going to go together. I came up with dimensions for each round that work for me, and I'm going to share that with you. And I also recommend that after each round, when you add the rows, you trim them, because otherwise it's very easy to get a skewed block, or when you're adding your blocks, they're not going to be equal. And not that they have to be, but because most of these strips are going to be straight and symmetrical, if you have one in there that's a little off, maybe cut it or sewn in a wedge instead of a straight strip, that's definitely going to stand out. So those are just some important tips that I found. I do have some other tips at the end I'm going to show you, give you some demonstration of how not to make the blocks. There were a few snafus that I found along the way that I want to show you. So here we are. You've seen the finished blocks. You've seen the general assembly of how this works, the components of what we need. You can decide size-wise what works best for you. But for me, this worked really well because it was uniform. And I used these 3 sizes for all my blocks. Well, for most of them. I did switch them around a little bit. But what you can do also is put 2 narrows and then put your wide strip on the outside. So you can also change it up that way, which is kind of fun. I just kind of liked the wide with the narrows in the middle, or excuse me, with the narrows on each side of it. You know, you have your own opportunity of what you want to do, and it makes it a lot of fun. I think it's a beautiful quilt block. There's a lot of artistic, creative opportunities for you using the fabrics, the way you lay out your strips and put it together. So have fun with it. And notice this is a rectangle. Not all of them have to be a square. But this block does need to be a square. That's an important tip. If you don't start with a square, you're going to have some unusually sized blocks that you're going to have to figure out. So let's go ahead. I'm going to show you how to make a block, and we'll get this quilt going. Now, as I said, when you're making your blocks, you want to make sure to trim them and ensure that you have a square and not a rectangle. And you want to do that between each row. So I know that I want about a 9-inch square here. And the beauty is, if you find out you're at 8.5 or you're at 9.5 or 10, all you have to do is adjust these outer strips to accommodate that. So there's a lot of flexibility here. I'm doing this uniformly for a number of different blocks just to show you how it works. Now we have our center, our first round with the 1, 2, and then 3 and 4. This row, the second round, we start on the side as well. So I know these are going to be my straightest pieces. I'm going to put these right on the edge of my line over here. So where this bold line is, where 0 would be, I'm going to put my strip right there, and I'm actually going to lay it over on top of the line. And what I'm going to do then is see where this falls here, because this is the other straight. This looks like it's got cut a little big, but I know these are straight because I did those really well. Now I have a little bit extra, so what I'm probably going to do, and you can make a decision here, do you want to have one be wider than the other? Do you want them exact? That's entirely up to you. But since I have to trim these edges off, I have to cut over there anyways. I'm just going to move this over just a smidge. And I'm going to then go ahead and get this trimmed. So by setting my block right here, then I can just put this right on the 9-inch. And I'm going to put it here and here. And whoops. Remember the trick, keep one part of your hand, at least a finger or part of your palm, off the ruler to keep it from slipping. Because if your entire hand is on here, it's very easy for that to happen. When you are bracing yourself against your hard surface off the ruler, you're going to have a better chance of a good, even, smooth cut without anything moving. All right, so now I have a straight edge here. I'm just going to trim the opposite side, line it up on my line, and I put it on top of the line. And then I'm going to bring this over here without moving my block. I'm going to set my ruler at 9 inches. Now I probably could have cut this like 9 1/8 or something like that, but quite honestly, you know, I'm not that worried about it. You do what works for you. For me, and like I said, for the tutorial purpose, it just made sense to keep things easy. All right, now it needs to measure 9 inches this way. So I lay this on my line, and look, see, I'm just a little bit over 9 inches. And this lines up, well, that one kicks out a little, so I am going to have to trim that. So let me go ahead and cut this side first. And we're going to lay this out. Now, the other thing as you're cutting, line these up with your seams. See how this lies right here? Now this is not perfectly square because this comes off the seam a little and this comes off the seam a little. You may not be able to see that up close, but it's pretty minuscule. But see how this red line follows right along our seam right there? We know the center is square. In terms of our corners are 90 degrees. It is a rectangle, but we have 90-degree corners, so therefore it's a square in my book. So see how these lines follow along that seam just a little bit that way, this way. So I get everything lined up on my 9-inch, and that looks good. And then I'm going to come back on, whoops, excuse me, did I bump the camera? Come back on this side and do my 9-inch. So that's there, and this one, there we go. Make sure we come in. Yep, see, this one stuck out a little bit. And by putting this line right here, I know that I'm nice and straight, and we're good. So now I'm going to put in my 2-inch. I'll trim it the same way. But what I want to show you on that one, on the 2-inch, is how we determine how big the last row needs to be. So if you are changing your strips, maybe you're going to make this strip, instead of cutting it 1 1/2, you'll cut it 1 1/4, so you get a 3/4 inch. I'll show you how to figure out your final strip to get the dimension you want, and it's much easier than doing all the math. I am all about visual equations. Does that work? Do the math with a picture. If I have to do too much with all the the measuring and dividing, and then, I may not be quilting very much. I'm here for the fun, and I don't want to get bogged down with the math. So I find shortcuts, and I'll share that with you in just a moment. And I have my block completed through the second row. Here's my center, my background, round 1 and round 2. And I just finger press as I go, simply because I'm sewing and recording simultaneously here. It wouldn't hurt to press these, and that's something that I find works well, particularly on blocks that are fussy with dimensions, in that they need to measure a certain dimension in order for the block to work. So let me show you how I figured out to measure these. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is square it up, but I need to line it up on the edge of my, let me move this up here, make sure you can see I'm not blocking anything. Let's see, that's too far over. Let's bring it this way. There, that helps a bit. Okay, so I want to bring this right here all the way over to that line, and I'm going to overlap it a bit. Now I'm going to put the shortest edges there, and if there's a little bit that hangs over more, that's fine, but I don't want to see any of that yellow line, so I'm going to pull this over just a bit. There we go. All right, now with that in place, I'm going to measure this, and most of my blocks have measured roughly 11.5 inches, and it looks like this one's going to be 11 3/4. And I'm going to go ahead and go with that because these are some fun prints, and I don't want to cut more off than needed. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this right here, making sure I have plenty to work with. I'm going to line this up with 11 3/4 and go ahead and trim it. Now I want to make sure that these lines are nice and straight. See how they're following the seams, which is great. So that means I've done a pretty good job of keeping my block nice and square as I'm sewing. Let me get my 3/4 there. So I'm going to trim this side. Then I'm going to flip it over and trim the other side. And usually I start with this inside, but I did this one and it's worked out great, which is wonderful. I think because that previous row or round had been trimmed, everything measured up pretty nicely, which is great. So this is right on the line again. I should be able to get to my 11 1/4, or was it 11 3/4, wasn't it? Yes, 11 3/4, even though I said 1/4. And I mean, we are just spot on here, so I don't even have to trim on that side. So we're good. Now we need to get this other, which we did this already. It's the same process. So let me go ahead. Now look at this. Uh-oh, am I going to get my 11 3/4? Okay, this is why you look for the shortest edge first. Save yourself some time. So this is going to be more like, let's see, if I pull this all the way over, can I squeak out a 3/4? Let me see. And I go to 3/4 and I go to 3/4. Let's look and see how that one looks. Actually, with a 1/4 inch seam, I'm just a smidge off. I'm okay with that, rather than go ahead and retrim. There we go. I was off a little. So we got that. So we're going to go with 11 3/4. So I've got that side, and the last side will do the trick here. So I'll line this up with our edge right there and go to 11 3/4. Yes, I love it. Look at that, it worked. So I think 11 1/2 probably would have been the best choice, but this is going to work for us. Now, the biggest difficulty for me in the beginning was determining not only the strip width, but the length. So by adding these on to the background and laying them the way I liked them, that took care of measuring the length. I didn't have to worry about that, as long as I knew how wide these strips were going to be. So then I figured out if my block is 7 let's see, 7 1/4, and then 9, and let's say 11 1/2. I knew what size to cut these. Now, I have a 1 1/2 inch strip to add here, but if I've cut myself short, I may not have enough fabric. Secondly, the other reason I'm showing you this is you may decide not to be so fussy about measuring everything and being certain widths, but you want to make sure when you get to that last round you have enough fabric. So that's what I'm going to show you. So again, we're going to place this right here, okay? And I line my ruler up, make sure that's nice and straight. Then I bring it over here, and I'm going to show you this with this ruler. So what I did was come to this point and come over to 13 1/2. Yeah, you can see that. So if I come to 13 1/2, I have 1 3/4 inches. So that's how much I need to have. Actually, it's closer to 1 7/8, I think. Yeah, I could see we've got 7/8 most of the way. So we're talking close to a 2-inch strip. So my 1 1/2 inch strips are on both sides. So that's going to finish with 1 inch, and that will give us a 1 inch width all the way around. Now, with this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at how much I need to get this block to be the total 13 1/2. And this is just shy of 2 inches. So I would cut a 2-inch block because that will give me trim room, what I call fudge factor. But don't forget, we need seam allowance. So I would I would have to allow 2 1/2 inches. Now, half of 2 1/2 is 1 1/4. And luckily my strips are cut at 1 1/2. So I'm good. Now let's say we needed 3 inches. So I would take my 3 inches, add 1/2 inch for 2/4 inch seam allowances, puts me at 3 1/2, and half of that is 1 3/4. So alternatively, what I was trying to do is put this in the middle and say, okay, how much here, how much here? Crazy. This is easy. Do it this way, and it's just going to make less math and more fun with fabric. So that's what I wanted to show you. That was the big point of showing you how to make this block, is how to finish it. So I'm going to add the last round to this and trim it. I'm so excited. I hope you love these blocks. They are so much fun. You need to try it. And here's a view of the very first block that I did. The biggest difference is that these are narrower 3/4 strips instead of the 1 1/2, which is ending up then at 1 inch. The reason these were narrower is I used a charm square, a 5-inch square in the middle, and then a 1 1/2 inch border around the edges. So you can vary your blocks throughout the quilt with different size centers. And just remember, you measure out to the outside edge to get your total dimension. This is also the additional strip I had to add that you'll hear more about as you're watching the video. But I also want to show you the second quilt that's shown here, because I think this is probably one of my favorites. Of course, it's my blues and greens, and I just think the intensity of the colors and how fun they look together is great. Now, you gotta love how a wonky strip finds its way in here. Not quite sure what happened there, but it all just sort of came together. Again, the miracle of rulers and rotary blades. I'm not sure what we do without it, but I do like how this block turned out. Practice absolutely makes perfect here. And the more you make this block and understand the proper construction, the better your blocks will come out. This was a learning experience for me. I want to show you a couple things I learned from my first block. So this is block number 1. And the very first and most visible is this mistake here. And if you look at these corners, see how they're supposed to stair step? Well, these are stacked on each other. and they should look like this. So as long as you do your rows correctly, which means do the sides first and then do the top, sides, top and bottom, and you keep that order, then you're going to keep your stair step. In this case, here's my sides, and I did this, let's see, yes, so I did these sides first on the 1, 2 second row, and I did the top and bottom like I needed to. But then what happened is, see here, you can tell because this is shorter that I did the bottom and the top before I did the sides, which made these longer and extend farther than they should, and I lose that stair step in the corner. So a lot of words for I did it out of order, and I just want you to see it's not critical because it's in the background. It's a solid color. Once it's quilted, no one's really going to notice one quilt out of, I don't know if I'm making 12 or 20. I think I'm making 20 of these, and so it's not going to be that visible. One thing that will be visible is if you line these blocks up. You know, my goal was to do a 13.5, but look at this. I'm a 1/2 inch short. If you want a 2-inch strip right here, then you have to cut a 2.5 inch strip. Unfortunately, I cut a 2-inch strip, and it came out at 1.5. So I'm a 1/2 inch short, but that's fixable. And that's kind of the beauty of these blocks, is you can find ways around the problems. So I happen to have a 1-inch piece because I need to add 1/2 inch, but only on 2 sides, 2 adjacent sides, because you know, if I were to try and just add a 1/4 inch on each side, that's going to be a bit fussy, and that will interfere with my plan for what's coming later. So what I'm going to do is I have my 1-inch background connected to the piece that I am going to use around the edge. It's 1 inches, so it'll fit 1 inches, 1 inch, so it'll reduce to a 1/2 inch after the seam allowance. And I'm going to lay it in place, doing the side seam first, and I'm going to gauge just where I'm going to put it, and I'll give it about 1.5 inches there. So I'm going to line this up, and this block has already been trimmed along these sides, so I know they're nice and straight, and I just have this piece from that last row that I did. And so I'm going to line this up to get my seam allowance and make sure everything's laying the way it needs to be. And we're just going to go through here all the way to the end. Oh, there's another one down here I want to show you. As I was going along, I mismeasured on here, and that's one of the biggest challenges I had when I first started, was measuring correctly, because each of these is going to measure differently because of this corner. This is probably like a 3.5 inch piece, so I wanted this one to be longer, and if I just cut it at say 4.5, there's this 1 inch or 3/4 inch piece here that's going to also need to be added. It's almost sort of like the allowance we need to add to go past this bar and then make it longer. So that was one of the challenges that I had, and I'm going to show you right here how I fixed it. So on this one, it wasn't long enough. I think actually this was more about the fabric I had wasn't long enough, but I had another little piece, and look at how wonderfully there just happened to be, you know, all these little lines that lined up. I said, that's great. That's never going to be noticed. Now, another thing, as you're adding this on, particularly when you work with narrow strips, it can be hard to, I'm just going to put my needle down so I don't move anything. It can be a bit hard to keep your seam allowance nice and even where you want it, just using the markings on your throat plate, this side of the fabric, or your presser foot. You also want to keep an eye over here. And if you look at this, you can see this seam allowance, I should say, this space between the edge of the fabric and the next strip is pretty consistent at about 1/4 inch. Not that that distance matters. What matters is that this is a consistently straight line. So if I'm sewing and I get down here and I see my distance is wavering, it's like, whoa, something's wrong. So when you get to the end, and for example, like right here where I added this piece, I have those extra seams, it kind of want to kicks out a little bit. So I'm just going to line this up, and I'm going to keep it in line with that, and I'm going to have a nice straight seam. So we've got this one, and I'm going to just trim it off the back a bit, and I'll finger press, and now I can come up here and trim this off. Do all this little trimming. All right, now we can take this piece and we're going to add it to this side. And let's see how this is going to work. So I need to finger press this one out. This is going to go on here like this. Now see, I have about 1.5 inches there, barely 1.5 inches. And I think I want to take this one a bit longer. So I'm going to take this down to, get under there, about, well, I don't want to go too far because I don't want to get into this corner where it's going to interfere with whatever's next to it. Because I have no idea how these blocks will go together as far as what's going next to what. The colors are all so random and mixed, which is the idea, but it's kind of hard to visualize at this point just how it's going to be. And that's usually the case when you're doing something for the first time. You kind of look at it and go, what is this going to be? But I am having fun making these blocks. They're a bit fussy. See how nice and straight that is? That's what we want. They're a bit fussy in that they take time. There's nothing difficult about it whatsoever. It's just about keeping yourself on track, paying attention to the little details, like do the side first and then do the top and bottom. Be consistent with your seam allowances. Make sure things line up, because when you have small, narrow strips, it will show up if they go at an angle and they'll look wonky. But you know, if the whole thing looks wonky, that's not a bad thing, because that would be another way to do this. You know, I can't imagine doing this on a wonky strips. I think I would go a little crazy, because this has taken me a bit to kind of wrap my head around in order to figure out these strip layouts. But that's okay. One step at a time. Once we learn the block, then we can do some other creative things. So I only needed 1/2 inch, and there we are. So I'm going to trim that down, so I'm at 13.5, and I think that looks really nice. So there you go. So keep your strips in order as you're adding them, and keep your measurements you know, aligned, so you know which way pieces are going to go and that you have enough. And if you need to add a piece, go ahead. It works. I don't think there's anything else added here. Here's one. I wanted to kind of keep some burgundies going here, and I found this and I liked it. But this had some green to it, which is fine. That's not a problem. But I put the green to this side instead of the corner because I just wanted that burgundy to come together. Just little thought processes along the way. And now I think I have 3 or 4 blocks made. I've got a lot more to go. So let me get sewing. And of course, there's this. Why do we let the obvious slip by? Of course, we need to open all the seams first. But I was busy sewing along. I got this strip and I went to open and it's like, wait, what happened? So I did have to tear this out, fold that out the way it should be. And I could have just pieced right here, but I had another short strip, so I since this was already torn out down to here, ripped out here, I just added a new strip and fixed the block, and it looks beautiful. But you know, this is about, if you take the time to trim and press every row. Obviously this is part of the same row, but just make sure you finger press as you're going along so you don't have this problem. And here's a preview of the first 6 blocks that I've finished. I've basted them together because this is not the end of this quilt. There's another step that is going to require a bit more sewing, and I can't wait to show you that, but that'll be in the next one. I think an hour is more than enough for a video today. So I will see you soon. I hope you loved this. It was so much information, but such fun. Thank you for sharing this with me. It's been a pleasure to be here with you today, and if you enjoyed it, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. I don't want you to miss any more fun videos. Have a great day. Thank you for being here.